The family picnic always looked the same. Same worn-out checkered blankets, same old folding chairs dragged out of garage storage, same salads labeled with masking tape names. But most importantly, it carried the same undertone judgment disguised as small talk. I arrived early, as usual. I brought a large container of homemade potato salad and a tub of watermelon cubes, chopped perfectly the night before. Nobody greeted me with more than a nod. My name was Natalie, and I was the one no one quite knew how to describe. At best, I was the one doing something in tech. At worst, I was the one who never really settled down. Rachel, my older sister, arrived 45 minutes late and still managed to command the space. Linen dress, oversized sunglasses, and perfume you could smell before you saw her. She swept into the crowd like she owned it, arms outstretched, cheeks kissed, stories launched mid-sentence. She was the family's PR darling, working in brand strategy for a luxury goods firm, which, in the Brooks family, ranked just below constitutional lawyer and just above neurosurgeon. Lisbon was incredible, Rachel declared, placing a glittering hand on our cousin Melissa's shoulder. I was consulting for a sustainability rebrand so exhausting, but so fulfilling. And the CEO actually asked for my personal pitch deck. People nodded with practiced admiration. I sat off to the side with my aunt, refilling plastic cups with lemonade and watching ants crawl toward the potato chips. Eventually, someone noticed me. Rachel did. Of course. She looked straight at me across the lawn, her voice projecting like she was on stage. "So, Natalie," she said, "how's the little startup doing? Still playing around with code in your garage?" It wasn't the first time she'd said something like that. Every year, the script barely changed, but this time, the word little landed heavier. Maybe it was the smirk she didn't bother hiding, or the fact that I had just returned from meeting with a venture firm that wanted to invest 8 figures. I still hadn't told anyone. Not because I was unsure, quite the opposite, but because I was waiting for the right moment. That moment wasn't supposed to be today. Still, her voice carried across the tables. "Must be nice," she added, "working in pajamas and calling it innovation." I smiled, like I always did. The smile you give when you've trained yourself not to show anger, the one you wear like armor. "Yeah," I said, "it has its perks." She laughed. Others joined. My dad, seated under the pop-up canopy with a chilled beer, gave me a wink like he thought I was in on the joke. I wasn't. I stood and walked toward the edge of the field, pretending to look for the bathroom tent. Instead, I just needed to breathe, away from the curated conversations and secondhand status updates. I looked down at my phone. One missed call, then another, then a third back to back. It was from Michelle. Michelle was my mentor, the founder of the logistics software company I'd joined 5 years ago and now helped grow. She was also the person who, last month, told me she was stepping down and had recommended me to the board as her replacement. The last time we spoke, she'd said the final vote would come soon. I didn't expect soon to mean today. I pressed the call button and held the phone to my ear, heart now beating so loudly I almost missed her first words. "Nat," she said, voice clear. "It's official. The board just voted. You're the new CEO." I froze. A butterfly seemed to get stuck mid-flight in my throat. Wait. Really, I asked, hearing my own voice go soft. Michelle laughed, warm and confident. "Really? Congratulations, boss." I stared out across the picnic lawn. Rachel was still in full form, laughing, gesturing, surrounded by admiration. My parents sat beneath their umbrella, relaxed and proud for Rachel. "Of course, I'm so proud of you," Michelle continued. "This is yours now. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." A breeze passed through the trees. I felt my entire life pivot on the axis of that one sentence. I turned slowly, still holding the phone to my ear. And then, without meaning to, I said it out loud. Thanks, Michelle. I'll review the board notes tonight and get started on the investor call deck. Rachel's voice faltered. People looked up. I kept talking, calm and deliberate. Oh, and let's finalize the PR language. TechCrunch is planning to run the CEO profile on Monday, so we need to lock that in. Now everyone was looking. Rachel blinked. My father straightened in his seat. I ended the call. Silence washed across the yard like a sudden cloud. Wait. You're the CEO, my cousin Josh asked, tilting his head. I nodded once. Yes. As of today. Rachel opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. That's a surprise, she said. Wow. CEO of what? Exactly. I glanced at her. Of the same company I've been working at for years. The logistics AI platform we built now serves over 200 distribution partners. We just crossed 100 million in valuation last quarter. She didn't respond. I picked up my lemonade. It tasted sweeter now. My mom finally spoke. You didn't tell us any of this. I smiled again, but this time not to hide. You never asked. The ants were still crawling toward the chips, but I wasn't the same girl who brought the snacks and hoped someone might notice. I was the one they just realized had built something big enough to shake their silence. The tension didn't snap, it settled, like fog rolling in over a lake, thick and cold and unavoidable. For a moment, nobody spoke. Even Rachel, usually armed with 1,000 things to say, had gone strangely still. She stared at me, trying to recalibrate everything she thought she knew. I sat back down at the edge of the picnic tables, sipping my lemonade as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Josh cleared his throat. So, wait, like a real CEO, not like a team lead? I tilted my head. A real CEO. Josh, of a real company, SwiftRoute Inc. We design predictive logistics systems using AI and real-time infrastructure data. It's used to optimize medical deliveries, reduce delays, that sort of thing. My Aunt Diane blinked, clearly not following. Medical deliveries, like hospital equipment, vaccines, emergency shipments, things that can't afford to be late. I said, our software helps anticipate obstacles, weather, construction, traffic patterns. We predict it all. It saves lives. Still, no response. I built the first version of the software in a garage. I added, casually, on weekends, after work. Rachel finally found her voice. Wait, you mean this is that app you used to mumble about during Thanksgiving? The one you said you were testing with some food banks? I nodded. You never said it was real. I took a breath. No one ever asked. Rachel looked like she'd been slapped with her own lipstick case. She opened her mouth again. But my dad cut in. Well, Natalie, that's something, he said, raising his glass as if catching up to the moment. Congratulations, honey. We're all very surprised. That word again. Surprised. As if what I'd done had popped up out of nowhere. As if I'd stumbled into it instead of clawing my way through server crashes, sleepless nights, and rejections so brutal I stopped counting. But I just smiled. Because here's the truth, this moment I had rehearsed it in my head 1,000 times. Not the exact setting, certainly not over picnic food and sunburnt children, but the moment itself, when I'd stop being overlooked. When the thing I built would finally become too big to ignore. Across the yard, Rachel leaned toward our cousin Melissa and whispered something. Melissa's brows lifted. Her eyes flicked toward me. I knew that look. It wasn't admiration. It was recalculation. That's what they were all doing now, trying to rearrange their mental maps to fit me in, when I had never fit before. It was both satisfying and quietly infuriating. Because this wasn't a magic trick. I hadn't turned into someone different overnight. I'd been this person all along, the one who stayed late, worked through holidays, taught myself 5 programming languages just to make something work. I thought about the night I deployed our first beta version, my hands shaking, my laptop overheating. I'd eaten instant noodles out of a mug and cried when the dashboard finally lit up green. No one had seen that. No one wanted to see it. But now that it had a valuation and a title and press interest, now it mattered. Rachel approached slowly, holding a cocktail skewer of strawberries. "So," she said, too casually, "is this, like, a funded company? Or are you still, you know, doing all the work yourself?" I held her gaze. "We just closed a $40 million round. Series B. SoftBank led it. Goldman Sachs is helping us prepare for IPO strategy." Her face tightened. "Oh," she said. "That's impressive. I thought you said startups were risky," I replied, my voice low and light. "Something you said last year. I believe the exact words were, 'You should marry someone stable instead of chasing fantasy apps.'" She flushed. "That was a joke." I let the silence answer for me. My mom joined us, smiling too brightly. "Sweetheart, you've always been so determined. We just didn't know what you were really working on. You're so quiet about it." I stopped explaining. I said, after realizing no one was listening. She blinked. "That's not fair, isn't it?" A pause stretched between us. The music from the Bluetooth speaker nearby changed to something more upbeat, but no one danced. My dad stood again, beer still in hand. "Well, Natalie, now that we do know, maybe we can help. There might be synergy. Rachel has great branding experience, and I've got contacts in a few VC firms. We could structure something family-driven." I didn't laugh, though I wanted to. 5 minutes ago, I was the pajama programmer. Now they wanted a seat at my table. I placed my cup down gently. "We're fully funded," I said, "and fully staffed." Rachel crossed her arms. "You're not even going to consider bringing the family in." I looked at her carefully. "You weren't interested when I was volunteering at a food bank, writing routing algorithms to keep seniors fed. You weren't interested when I was bootstrapping server space on credit cards. Why now?" She opened her mouth but said nothing. I continued, "You don't get to parachute in after the first TechCrunch headline and call it support." My mom sighed. "Sweetheart, don't be so dramatic." "No," I said, "I'm just being honest." They stood frozen, 2 feet from me, but years away in understanding, and I finally realized they weren't surprised by my success. They were stunned that I no longer needed their permission to be seen. The next morning, I woke up earlier than I needed to. The light creeping through my apartment window felt too soft to match the aftershock of what had happened the day before. My phone, still resting on the kitchen counter, showed 7 unread messages, 4 missed calls, and 2 voicemails, all from some combination of Rachel, my mother, or my father. I didn't open any of them. Instead, I made coffee, sat on the floor of my living room, the one with the half-unpacked boxes and scuffed hardwood, and let the silence speak. It had taken years to get to this point. And not just in the professional sense. The distance I'd had to build between myself and my family wasn't born out of resentment, it was born out of survival. They didn't understand me. They never had. I remembered sitting at Thanksgiving dinners listening to Rachel talk about market segmentation and audience personas. words that always seemed to float just out of reach from actual meaning. Everyone applauded her thought leadership, even when she didn't actually lead anything. Meanwhile, I was busy trying to fix a failing API before a test client abandoned us. And when they asked what I did, I simply said, working on a logistics platform. That was the end of the conversation every time. In their world, value was measured by visibility, by optics, by titles and LinkedIn-ready job descriptions. What I was doing didn't fit in their mold, so they ignored it or worse, trivialized it. But I never stopped building. I thought back to my first job after college, a warehouse optimization analyst for a regional shipping company. Not exactly a dream job. My days were filled with dusty spreadsheets, manual logging, and the occasional panic when a truck arrived late and no one knew why. But those delays taught me everything. I saw how fragile the last mile of delivery really was, how quickly human lives could be affected when systems failed. I watched a shipment of insulin arrive 36 hours late during a snowstorm because no one thought to reroute based on a local weather pattern. The driver cried in the lobby of the clinic. I wrote it down. Later that week, I started designing a predictive rerouting module on my own time. It didn't work. Not at first. I crashed my computer 3 times trying to run simulations, but eventually, it clicked. One algorithm became a prototype. One prototype became a platform. I called it SwiftRoute. No investors, no team. Just me, a used laptop, and my growing obsession with reducing failure rates in last-mile delivery systems. I volunteered with a local food pantry on weekends just to field test the software. I watched how efficiently they delivered food once my routing engine cut the average delivery time by 18 minutes per stop. That meant more meals, more people fed, real results. Still, I didn't tell anyone in my family. I couldn't bear to see their blank stares or hear Rachel's half laughs. Instead, I quietly kept going. The moment everything changed came 2 years in, when a small regional medical supplier used SwiftRoute during a trial partnership. When they saw the impact, fewer failed deliveries, faster emergency shipments, they offered a licensing deal. That money helped me leave my full-time job and finally go all in. It was around then that I met Michelle. She'd founded a competing platform in the early 2000s, but exited after acquisition. A friend connected us after reading one of my white papers on route prediction logic. I was nervous when we met, unsure of what she'd think. But after 10 minutes, she closed her laptop and said, "You're the real thing." Michelle became more than a mentor. She became my fiercest advocate. When I couldn't afford a second engineer, she helped me bootstrap a contractor. When our servers went down during a winter storm in Michigan, she stayed on Zoom with me until 3 a.m. When an investor tried to lowball me during our seed round, she told me, "Don't just take money, take belief." Her faith in me never wavered, even when mine did. Which is why, when she told me she was stepping down and wanted to recommend me as her successor, I thought she was joking. "You've built this engine," she said. "You scaled it. You led. They just didn't give you the title yet." Now, I had it. And yet, I found myself sitting on the floor, unable to move for a moment. Not because I doubted my ability, but because I had spent so long moving in silence that being seen felt loud. I finally picked up my phone. One message from Rachel stood out. "We should talk. I didn't mean to sound dismissive yesterday. Proud of you. Really." I stared at it. Read it again. It wasn't anger, I felt it was detachment. Like her words had arrived at the wrong destination. Too late to matter. Instead, I opened Slack. My team was already buzzing. Alicia, my COO, had sent a checklist of announcements, scheduling requests, and a link to a doc labeled CEO Transition Plan. Her message ended with a simple line, "The whole team's behind you. Let's make this next chapter count." I smiled. These were the people who knew me before the headlines, who stayed when our server costs outpaced our revenue, who stuck around not because they saw a polished pitch deck, but because they believed in what we were solving. That was my real family, not the one at the picnic, not the one that only clapped when it was convenient. I stood up, poured another cup of coffee, and opened my laptop. Today wasn't about proving myself anymore. It was about building forward, with the people who never needed to be convinced. 2 days later, I walked into our headquarters, a refurbished warehouse on the edge of the city that still smelled faintly of fresh paint and possibility. High ceilings, exposed beams, and a mix of thrifted desks and top-tier servers lined the open floor. It wasn't flashy, but it was ours. This was where I met Michelle for the first time, 2 years ago. She had flown in unexpectedly after reading my technical white paper and asked to see the office. At the time, office meant one long desk, a second-hand couch, and a space heater that only worked if you smacked it. She looked around, nodded once, and said, "You're going to outgrow this place fast." I laughed then. Now, I knew she wasn't kidding. Michelle arrived that morning for our final one-on-one as founder and successor. She greeted me with a hug and a familiar, quiet smile. "No turning back now," she said. "I'm not interested in turning back," I replied. We walked together to the second-floor mezzanine that doubled as a small executive meeting room. It overlooked the entire floor, engineers, data scientists, product managers, all hunched over laptops, headphones on, working like something vital depended on it. Because it did. "Every great founder has a breaking point," Michelle said, sipping her tea. "A moment where they realize they can't do everything. And if they try, they'll fail at the one thing only they can do." I nodded. I had hit that wall months ago. During a product rollout, I tried to code, design, and manage 3 teams at once. The deployment crashed, and I ended up asleep at my desk with a nosebleed and a server status report printed on my chest. That's when Michelle started nudging me toward executive focus, delegation, vision. Now, it was all on me. "Have you talked to them?" she asked. I didn't need to ask who she meant. My family. I shook my head. "They've been reaching out, but I'm not sure I want to respond yet." Michelle gave a knowing look. "It's your call," she said, "but don't carry their inability to see you as proof that you weren't worth seeing." I sat with that. Michelle didn't need to explain. She'd told me before that her own father had once told her business isn't for women with soft voices. She went on to build and sell 2 companies before she was 35. He never apologized. "Sometimes you don't get the apology," she once told me. "You just get the proof." Later that day, Alicia and I reviewed the final CEO announcement press release. My name in bold at the top, along with the line I had quietly insisted be included. Natalie Brooks steps into the CEO role after scaling SwiftRoot's predictive logistics engine across 27 states and leading its Series B funding to a $100 valuation. I didn't want flowers or praise. I just wanted the facts recorded properly. The work had to speak. While Alicia handled media outreach, I took a moment for myself. I walked down to the basement storage room, one of the original rooms from before the renovation. It still had our first folding table, the whiteboard with diagrams drawn in half-faded marker, and a rack of our earliest merch t-shirts with the SwiftRoot logo off-centered and slightly crooked. It looked like nothing special, but I remembered everything that had happened here. The night we got our first regional pilot, the day our servers overloaded and we lost 6 hours of routing data, the argument I had with my first engineer when he told me, "We'll never scale this." We did. I took one of the old t-shirts and folded it into my bag. A reminder, not of struggle, but of what quiet belief could build. As I climbed back upstairs, my phone buzzed. Rachel again. Dinner. Just us. I want to understand. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I joined Alicia in the war room. She had already pulled up analytics from our site. Traffic was spiking. The CEO announcement was trending on Twitter, and the TechCrunch article had gone live. We watched the numbers roll in. Users, mentions, investors we hadn't even pitched yet asking for meetings. "Do you want me to schedule interviews?" Alicia asked. "Yes," I said. "But not just for me. I want to highlight the team. Get Mia in front of Wired for her data visualization work. And Theo, he deserves recognition for building the incident alert layer from scratch." Alicia smiled. "You're not like most CEOs." "I'm not trying to be," I said. That night, we ordered pizza and held an impromptu team toast. No champagne, just cheap paper cups and sparkling water. But the energy in the room was electric. They weren't just employees, they were believers. People who saw the value before the validation. People who stayed when we were 2 months away from closing the doors. People who told me I wasn't crazy for caring so much about failed deliveries and elderly patients getting oxygen tanks on time. Before we wrapped up, Michelle pulled me aside. "This is your runway now," she said. "Make it yours." I nodded. And as she left, I stood by the window overlooking the city, the lights glittering like a circuit board. I thought again of that picnic, of Rachel's smirk, of my father's raised glass, of the pause before they tried to rebrand their indifference as concern. They could keep their silence, their disbelief. I had my company, and now I had my name fully, finally attached to something that mattered. The days leading up to our Series B announcement felt like standing at the edge of a thunderstorm charged, a little chaotic, but filled with momentum you couldn't turn away from. Everyone on the team moved like clockwork. There was no need to micromanage anymore. They'd grown into their roles the same way I had grown into mine, through fire, through doubt, through sheer necessity. What no one knew, not Alicia, not Michelle, not even the board, was that I'd been preparing for something else behind the scenes. Something personal. For the first time in years, I had started sketching the framework for a nonprofit, not a vanity project, not a tax shelter. Something real. A foundation to fund high school girls interested in logistics, operations, systems thinking, the kinds of girls no one ever saw coming. The kind I used to be. The ones tinkering with spreadsheets instead of sketchbooks. Who felt invisible in a world that only celebrated loud, glossy ambition. I didn't want them to have to walk the gravel road alone. Every night that week, after meetings and investor calls, I stayed up researching grant structures, outreach models, how to build a pipeline from underfunded schools to paid internships. I didn't want to give speeches. I wanted to give someone the server space I once couldn't afford. I knew I'd name it the Brooks Foundation, not as a tribute to my family, as a reclamation. The name that once symbolized all the doors I wasn't invited through would now open them for someone else. But I kept it quiet. Until it was time. Meanwhile, the buzz from the CEO announcement was turning into real pressure. Alicia fielded press requests like a bouncer. We had interview offers from Forbes, Bloomberg, and 2 startup podcasts I used to listen to when I coded alone in that freezing warehouse with no heat. I said yes to Forbes, not because I cared about the spotlight, but because I knew some 15-year-old girl somewhere might read it and feel seen. Still, through all the success, there was the ever-present hum of them. The texts from Rachel, just checking in again. "Hope you're not too swamped." The email from my father. "Your mother and I were talking, perhaps a joint venture could be beneficial, a family-run impact firm." Even Emily, who hadn't attended a family event in months, suddenly emerged with an Instagram comment. "So proud of you, sis. Women in tech." I didn't engage. Not out of spite, out of clarity. They hadn't been absent from my journey. They had been actively dismissive. My father used to joke that I was playing pretend CEO whenever I talked about leadership strategy. Rachel called my startup a project until last year. Emily suggested I work in political logistics as if I could only be valuable inside someone else's vision. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply done explaining. Still, when Alicia floated the idea of making a major philanthropic announcement alongside our funding news, I paused, then I nodded. Let's announce the foundation too. You're sure? She asked. You want to use your name on it? Yes, I said, but on my terms. We wrote the press release that night. It ended with a quiet paragraph, nearly an afterthought among all the investor quotes and partnership statistics. Swift Root is proud to announce the launch of the Brooks Foundation, a $5 million initiative to support young women from underrepresented backgrounds pursuing careers in supply chain tech. That was the line that meant the most to me. A few days later, I stood on the main floor of our warehouse headquarters, surrounded by foldable chairs and half a dozen curious high school girls from a local charter STEM academy. They were sharp-eyed, skeptical, and smarter than I had been at their age. I walked them through our dashboard, showed them how we forecast disruption probabilities, explained why delivery delays aren't just annoying, they can be life-threatening. They asked hard questions. I gave real answers. One of them, Samira, stood in front of our route projection map, her head tilted. What happens when the data's wrong? She asked. I smiled. Then we debug the data, not the dream. She nodded slowly. Like that made perfect sense. I watched her trace a route line on the screen with her finger. That one moment made everything worth it. Afterward, Alicia handed me a manila envelope. Inside was a rough draft of our next newsletter, and beneath it, a single line handwritten by Michelle Founders. Don't just build companies. They build futures. You've done both. I blinked once, twice, swallowed the weight in my throat. Later that evening, I got another message from my mother. We read about the foundation. That's extraordinary. Would you consider letting us host a fundraiser for it at the Vineyard House? I stared at the screen. I hadn't been invited to that house in years. The same house where Daniel's law school graduation was toasted with aged wine, and my Carnegie Mellon acceptance was acknowledged with a passing nod. The same place where Emily's campaign kickoff had balloons, while my early Swift Route prototype got called a coding phase, and now they wanted to host a fundraiser. No. Instead of replying, I made a phone call. To Mrs. Jennings, the principal at the charter school. I asked her if we could host a student showcase in our office space. Let the girls present their logistics projects. Bring in some of our engineers to mentor them. No press, just impact. She said yes. I ended the day where it all began at the window above the warehouse floor, looking out over Boston. The city didn't know what I'd sacrificed. It didn't care. But I did. And now, I was using every inch of what I had built, not for revenge, not for redemption, but for redirection. Because legacy isn't something you inherit. It's something you build. The day of the showcase arrived quietly, without the glitz of a fundraiser or the spectacle of a political event. There were no press kits, no photographers, no distant relatives angling for introductions. Just a small cluster of high school girls in neatly pressed uniforms, cradling folders, notebooks, and the kind of nervous energy I remembered too well. I stood at the entrance of our headquarters, wearing jeans and a company hoodie, offering fist bumps and smiles as they trickled in. Alicia had arranged everything from mentor pairings to printed name tags, and Mia from our data team had baked cookies shaped like delivery trucks. It was perfect. Inside, we'd rearranged the warehouse floor into small learning pods. Each station had a laptop, a whiteboard, and one Swift Route engineer assigned to guide the girls through real-world logistics, Problems resupply planning after a hurricane, hospital equipment routing in snowy conditions, vaccine refrigeration delivery through rural zones. These were the use cases we dealt with every day. But for the girls, it was the first time someone treated them like they could solve it. I walked past Samira again, the girl who had asked about faulty data last time. She was sketching out a rerouting algorithm using simple tree logic, her mentor nodding with genuine respect. That's when it hit me. This was bigger than anything my family had ever offered me. Bigger than any dinner toast or check from a trust fund. This was belief, not in hindsight, but in real time. As I made my way upstairs for a few minutes of quiet, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Rachel. "Hey, we're planning Mom's birthday next week. You in?" She attached a smiling selfie, as if the last 2 weeks hadn't happened. As if the dinner table conversation where I was cut out of the family's financial future had evaporated the moment it became inconvenient. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat at my desk, pulled out a small envelope I had tucked away months ago. It was the letter from the Brooks family attorney, the one that had politely explained I was on hold from any major asset allocations, pending greater clarity around my professional stability. I reread it once. It no longer stung. It just felt irrelevant. On my screen, the internal dashboard showed the most recent performance metrics: 213 partner sites, 96.4% delivery accuracy, $40 million in cash reserves. SwiftRoute wasn't a startup anymore. It was infrastructure. There was a knock at the glass wall behind me. Alicia stepped in, holding a small parcel. "Delivery for the CEO," she teased. It was a hand-addressed envelope, elegant cream stationery. I recognized the handwriting immediately, my mother's. Inside, a card embossed with a rose motif, and a short message written in fountain pen. "We're proud of what you've done. Truly, would love to reconnect. On neutral ground." Dinner signed. Simply, Mom. No denial, no apology, just a cautious white flag. I stared at it, unsure how to feel. Pride, anger, closure. I felt none of those things. Instead, I felt something simpler, a quiet, clean boundary taking shape. The family that had once defined my limitations now had no authority over them. I walked downstairs again. The showcase had shifted into Q&A mode. One of the girls raised her hand and asked if SwiftRoute would ever expand into public transport systems. I smiled. "I've thought about it," I said. "But first, we're expanding into Asia." Mia's eyebrows lifted from across the room. That was new? I hadn't even told the team yet, but it was time. That night, after the students left each carrying home a tote bag with their own SwiftRoute notebooks and a small certificate of completion, I stayed behind with Alicia. We sat on the steps of the loading dock, eating leftover cookies in the warm dusk. She nudged me with her shoulder. "You're different lately," she said. "How so lighter? Like you finally dropped the backpack full of bricks you've been hauling around since we met." I nodded. Maybe I did. I didn't have to name the bricks. She already knew them, the ones shaped like Rachel's smirks. My father's disappointment. The countless times my success had to be explained rather than celebrated. Now, it didn't need explaining. It was evident. It was operational. It was changing the world in tangible, measurable ways. And the people who mattered saw it. Before we parted ways for the night, Alicia handed me one more thing. A clipboard of names, young women who had attended the showcase and wanted to apply for summer internships. 15 of them. 15 girls who, 2 weeks ago, didn't know what logistics even meant. Now, they were dreaming in supply chains. I sat back and looked at the stars rising over the Boston skyline. They weren't as bright as the ones above the Brooks family estate in Maine, but they felt more honest, because no one handed me this view. I climbed to it, one stubborn, quiet, underestimated step at a time. 3 days later, I received a calendar invite from an unfamiliar email address. Subject: Healthcare Reform Panel. Confirmed guests briefing location: Washington, D.C. Organizer: Emily Brooks. I stared at the screen. There was no personal message, no warm hope you're well, just a line in the notes field. Would be great to include SwiftRoute as a model for tech-forward infrastructure policy. No acknowledgement of the past. No apology for the dismissals. No context for why I'd be helpful now, only the implication that I was useful. And that was always the pattern, wasn't it? The Brooks family didn't make room. They used openings. Still, for some reason, I clicked through the attached deck, likely a draft presentation from Emily's campaign team. Buried on slide 12 beneath a section titled Innovation Partners was a SwiftRoute logo lifted straight from our website. No permission, no context, just inserted, like I was already part of their story. And beside it, in small gray font, pending confirmation, Natalie Brooks, CEO pending, like I was the one they were waiting on, like I was a variable. I leaned back in my chair, watching the city move outside my office window. Across the street, a traffic jam had begun to form. A perfect visualization of what we tried to fix: everyday real-world systems, clogged by old thinking and too many assumptions. I opened a blank email draft and typed, "Subject: Repanel Participation. Hi Emily, I noticed SwiftRoute was included in your campaign deck. We haven't agreed to be involved. Please remove our logo. Best, Natalie." That was it. No anger, no shade, just a boundary. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. It was her. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Emily," I said. She didn't waste time. "Okay." That email was cold, she said, half laughing, half accusing. "You could have just texted me." "No," I replied. "I couldn't." Silence. Then a quieter voice. "I'm trying to mend things," she said, by assuming I'd say yes to something I wasn't asked about. Another silence. "I thought it would be good press," she said eventually, "for both of us. I mean, come on, two sisters, both successful, working in policy and tech. That sells. That sells. Not that matters. Not that helps. Not that's meaningful. It sells." And there it was again, the core difference between us. I had spent the last decade solving real problems that impacted real people. She had spent hers perfecting the framing of things. I wasn't a brand. I was a builder. "I'm not interested," I said. "You don't even want to hear the rest of the pitch, no." I said simply, "SwiftRoute doesn't exist to elevate the Brooks name. That name was never in the trenches with me. It only shows up now that we're profitable. You're being harsh." "No," I said calmly. "I'm being honest." Emily exhaled. "You've changed. I've clarified." I ended the call before it could turn into something messier. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear, which was better. That afternoon, Alicia came into my office holding a small bouquet. "No card," she said, placing it gently on my desk. "Just showed up." The flowers were white lilies. I knew instantly who sent them. My mother's favorite. I said nothing, just moved the vase to the corner of the desk and returned to the product roadmap meeting. Because work didn't stop for sentimentality, not anymore. Later that night, I opened a new doc. I started outlining a keynote, not for a campaign event or a fancy conference, for the next student cohort visiting us in the fall. I titled it, Visibility Isn't Value. Systems are. Because that's what I had learned. That being seen was never the end goal. Being useful was. Being real was. After the draft was done, I received one final message that made me pause. It was from my father. Subject discussion proposal. Natalie, your mother and I recognize that our approach in the past may not have reflected the support you deserved. If you're open to it, we'd like to revisit your place in the trust. We can schedule time with the estate advisor. Let me know what works. Dad. My place in the trust. The very thing they had removed me from publicly, elegantly, decisively was now back on the table. I stared at the screen for a long time, then I clicked Compose. Subject Re-Trust. Hi, Dad. Thank you for the message. There's no need to revisit anything. I've already built my own. Warmly. Natalie. I hit send, closed my laptop, and for the first time in a long time, I felt no echo behind my own words, no shadow of doubt, no internal question mark. I wasn't looking for a seat at their table anymore. I had built my own. A week passed. The press buzz died down, the inbox quieted. Even Rachel stopped texting. It felt good. Not peaceful, exactly, but uncluttered. Like walking through a room that used to be filled with noise and realizing you could finally hear yourself think. I spent those days deep in product meetings, team one-on-ones, and writing the first draft of our Asia expansion strategy. Tokyo would be the test market. I had already connected with a Japanese nonprofit that distributed dialysis equipment in remote areas, exactly the kind of logistical challenge SwiftRoute was built to solve. I didn't share the plan with anyone outside the company, especially not my family. That door was closed now. Not locked, not slammed, just not for them. And yet, one afternoon, while clearing out the bottom drawer of my desk, I found something I hadn't seen in years. A printed photo of the Brooks estate in coastal Maine. The same one we returned to every Christmas. The white-pillared colonial mansion with its marble foyer and oil paintings of ancestors who likely signed things with quills. In the corner of the photo, a younger version of me sat on the stone wall that lined the circular driveway. I must have been 16, wearing jeans and a hoodie, holding a laptop on my knees, while everyone else posed inside the house for a holiday photo. I remembered that day. They had asked me to come in for the portrait. I said I'd be there in a minute. I was fixing a bug on a custom invoice template for the florist I worked for part-time. My uncle made a joke about missing the picture for flower math. Everyone laughed. I didn't. But I stayed outside. I looked at that picture now and realized I wasn't just excluded. I was already choosing something different. Even then, that night, I received a package, no note, just a hand-stitched leather journal with a gold-stamped monogram N.B. Inside the front cover was a single line, handwritten in ink. You were never the disappointment, just the disruption. It took me a second. The handwriting belonged to Aunt Clara, my father's sister, the one person in that family who'd ever really seen me. The same woman who had raised her glass at the infamous dinner and toasted me when no one else had found the words. She had once told me, every family needs one person who refuses the script. That person pays the price but also changes the ending. I hadn't thought of myself as that person before, but maybe I was. That same week, we held a team dinner at the office. No outside guests, no investors, no suits, just pizza boxes, playlists, and a few open laptops with demo builds running in the background. After dessert, Theo from back-end poured a round of sparkling water and raised his glass. To our CEO, he said, for turning a side project into a system that saves lives. Everyone clinked glasses. I didn't know what to say. so I didn't say much. Just smiled and nodded, and let the moment breathe. Later, as people packed up and I walked through the now empty warehouse, Alicia handed me a small white envelope. "One more delivery," she said. "Dropped off by messenger." Inside, an embossed invitation. The Brooks Family Legacy Gala. Celebrating 3 generations of achievement. Kindly join us for an evening of heritage and future vision. There it was again. Heritage. Legacy. The words they wore like armor. At the bottom of the card, in flowing script, "Emily and Daniel look forward to welcoming you. Not we, not mom and dad, just the siblings who had once cut me off mid-sentence, mid-dream, mid-life." I turned the card over. Blank. No handwritten note. Just an address and a dress code. They didn't want me back. They wanted the version of me they could now show off. I placed the invitation on the windowsill next to the lilies, now just dried petals in a glass vase. I didn't need to tear it up. Letting it gather dust would be enough. And then, I opened my laptop and sent a different kind of RSVP. It was to the board. I proposed something bold: a 10% reinvestment of our Series B round into infrastructure grants for women-led last-mile logistics startups in developing markets. Not as charity, as strategy. Because the people solving real problems are almost never the ones sitting on panel stages with lapel mics and legacy last names. They're the ones no one sees until it's too late to ignore them. The board approved the motion unanimously. The next morning, I drafted a simple blog post for our company site. No headline-grabbing language. No family names. Just this: "We believe brilliance grows where it's planted. So we're planting where others don't look. If you're a woman building logistics tech in a garage, a farm, a dorm room, or a warehouse with no heat, you're exactly who we're looking for." No one in my family shared it, but hundreds of young women did, and that finally felt like enough. A month after the launch of our infrastructure grant program, I found myself in Baltimore again. Not for a conference, not for press, for a high school, an all-girls STEM academy tucked between a row of auto shops and a shuttered grocery store, where the playground fence was zip-tied in 3 places and the parking lot doubled as a makeshift lunch area. But inside, you could feel the electricity of minds at work. I was invited as part of their Real World Builders series, 50-minute talks from people who weren't just dreaming but doing. No stage, no spotlight, just a circle of metal folding chairs in a modest auditorium with sticky floors and a projector that buzzed. I was the first guest speaker they'd ever had from the logistics field, which made sense. No one ever told these girls that logistics was a language worth learning. I started my talk the same way I always do. "My name is Natalie Brooks. I run a company that makes sure important things like medicine, ventilators, vaccines arrive where they're supposed to, when they're supposed to." A few heads tilted. You know those moments when your Uber says arriving in 5 minutes and then doesn't move for 20? Now imagine that, but it's an oxygen tank headed to your grandma's nursing home. That's what we fix. The room got quiet, real quiet. And I knew I had them. I told them about the early days. Writing code in a borrowed storage unit, skipping dinners to test route simulations, delivering pizza during the day to fund server bills at night. I saw them lean in, not because they were impressed, but because they recognized something in the story. That familiar tightrope between ambition and invisibility. During the Q&A, a girl in the second row raised her hand. She couldn't have been older than 15. Braids tied back. A determined, careful stare. "My parents think logistics is for truck drivers," she said. "They want me to be a doctor or lawyer. Something serious. Did your family support you?" The room went still. Even the teachers. I paused. Not for dramatic effect. Just to breathe. "No," I said finally. Not at first. Not when it mattered. She looked down like I'd confirmed her worst fear. But I wasn't done. What I learned, I continued, is that sometimes the people closest to us can't see us, not because we're invisible, but because we don't look like a reflection of their dreams. And that's okay. Her eyes came back to mine. You don't have to fight them, I added. You just have to build something they can't deny. Silence again, and then slow, deliberate applause. Not polite, not practiced, earned. After the session, the girls swarmed me. Some asked about internships, others asked how to apply to engineering programs. A few just hugged me and said thank you with more weight than I knew how to carry. One handed me a handmade thank you card, crayon on construction paper. Inside, it read, "Thank you for proving that a girl like me can run the whole system." I blinked too fast and tucked it into my tote bag before I could cry. That night, back in my Boston loft, I pulled it out again and placed it in my top drawer right next to the estate letter that once said I was being excluded from the trust. 2 pieces of paper. One to erase me. One to confirm that I exist in ways that matter far more. Later that week, Rachel left me a voicemail. "Hey, Emily and I were talking. We'd really like to start fresh. There's a lot of opportunity now with your platform and some of our donors. Maybe we could collaborate on something. Or even just talk. No pressure. Of course." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened a new browser tab and purchased a set of refurbished laptops for the Baltimore school. Loaded with SwiftRoot simulation tools, sandboxed for learning, it was a quiet delivery, no press release, no gala, no branding, just impact. And then, I hosted a private dinner for the people who had built this with me, my team. Alicia, Theo, Mia. The warehouse crew who stayed past midnight during early builds, the interns who became leads. We ate in the original office space, still with no ceiling tiles and concrete floors. Just folding tables and the glow of warm string lights looped around server racks. Someone brought flowers. Peonies. No card. But Alicia handed them to me with a smile. And that knowing look. I placed them in a chipped glass jar on the windowsill, right next to the picture of our warehouse on day 1. No furniture, no investors, just vision. That was the throne I'd built. Not from entitlement, from effort. And sitting there, surrounded by the people who believed before anyone else did, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Rachel, not at my father, not even at the version of me who once begged to be noticed. She had done her job. She'd survived long enough for me to grow into someone who didn't need their permission, only her own. The first snow arrived quietly, dusting Boston in a coat of soft defiance. It clung to street corners and loading docks, muffling the city into a kind of hush I'd always loved. I stood by the window of our headquarters, holding a mug with steam curling out of it, one of those novelty ones, gifted by a Baltimore teacher. It read, "Shipping confidence since 2023. Alicia had laughed when she saw it. I hadn't, because I remembered the exact day confidence had become something I could deliver not just to customers, but to girls like Samira, to engineers doubting their code, to versions of myself who once felt invisible. I took a sip and turned toward my desk, where a small stack of holiday cards had arrived, one from an investor, another from a regional clinic that now depended on SwiftRoot to deliver time-sensitive medications, a third from the Japanese nonprofit we'd just onboarded. But I hadn't sent any. This year, I didn't feel like pretending, not to family, not to people who thought holidays meant obligation, not respect. Still, on the day of the Brooks Family Legacy Gala, I felt something unexpected, not dread, not anger, curiosity. I didn't go, but I did watch the live stream briefly, enough to see the velvet backdrops, the panel seating arrangements, The rehearsed applause as Daniel and Emily took turns at the podium. Their speeches were polished, all branding, no blood, and in one small moment, the camera panned over the table cards at the Innovation Circle section. There it was, reserved for Natalie Brooks, Swift wrote CEO. An empty chair. They'd saved me a seat I never asked for, never earned, never needed. I closed the tab and smiled. Later that evening, I walked the quiet halls of our office. Every door had a paper snowflake on it. Mia's idea. Someone had put a Santa hat on the main server unit. Our HR intern had hung up a sign over the break room that read, "Logistics making holidays happen since forever." I loved them for that. As I walked past the loading dock, I paused. There was one last package sitting on the table. Handwritten. My name. No return address. I opened it gently. Inside a first edition copy of the Systems Thinkers Field Guide, a rare book I once tried to check out from a university library and never found again. Inside the cover, in slanted print. To the girl who didn't need to be seen to build what matters. Aunt Clara. I blinked. Twice. Then closed the book and held it for a while. It was the kind of gift that had nothing to prove. Just recognition. Offered without strings. That night, I returned home to my loft, still small, still spare. I sat by the window with the city glowing beneath me and pulled out the thank you cards from Baltimore, flipping through each message like pages in a story I hadn't realized I'd written. One said I didn't know tech could be about helping people. I want to do that now. Another, thanks for showing up. No one does. And one more, written in pencil, clearly erased and rewritten at least twice. My mom says girls don't lead companies, but I showed her your picture. She didn't say anything after. I placed the cards beside my keyboard, opened my laptop, and started drafting something new, not a funding pitch or a technical document. A letter to the girls in next year's Swift Route Fellowship class, the ones coming from overlooked towns, underfunded schools, quiet places where people don't dream in algorithms because they've never been invited to. The letter began like this. You will not always be seen. That's not your failure. It's theirs. But the systems you build, the routes you optimize, the lives you improve, the chaos you tame, those will be seen and remembered. Build them anyway. As I typed, my phone buzzed once. A final text from Emily. Happy holidays. If you ever want to talk, I mean really talk, I'm here. I looked at it, then turned the screen face down. It could wait, because some conversations no longer needed to be had. Some bridges didn't need burning. They simply didn't need crossing again. I looked at the peonies in the jar, dry, but still holding their shape, just like everything I'd built. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving others right. The ones who saw me before the title, before the headlines, before the CEO label made it easy to clap. The ones who believed when belief had no applause attached. And now, all I wanted to do was build more space for them. For girls like them. For ideas like mine once was unpolished, uninvited, and entirely worth it. Because that's the real legacy. Not the kind that's passed down, the kind you choose to pass forward.